Hello, biology students. I want to talk to you today about how to use your green. So when I say green, I mean this sheet here, and I think that's backwards. If so, let me actually flip me so that I'm right side out there. So this document that you should keep. It has two sides to it. We're going to be using the side today that looks a little more like this, but you could also use the back of it. There's similar informations on both sides, and this is helping us understand the alleles that stand for the different traits we've been studying. So in our person, if you recall, there's thumb shape and hairline and earlobes and hemoglobin and that cystic fibrosis gene and all the variety of things, all the way down to our Y chromosomes that are at the very bottom here. And I know there's a lot going on here, but you actually should kind of start saying, "Oh, I understand what's going on here." So you recognize that what I've done here for the trait, so the gene, so thumb shape, two different traits. The curved thumb, like Mr. Ackert has, and then the straight thumb, which some of you may have. Mr. Ackert does not have a straight thumb. And so we also see that there are these two letters here. There's a big T and there's a little t, and you might remember that from other science courses about dominance and recessive, and I'll come back to that in a moment. Then you actually see this series of letters. And so this series of letters, you should say, oh, I bet those are amino acids. And so this is the protein in my simulation that I've created that stands for, that would represent a curved thumb. So if Mr. Acker were to look deep down in his DNA, although this is an oversimplification, you would find that methionine, I think this is phenylalanine, oh, I don't remember these other ones. I don't have them memorized very well. Arginine, and I don't know. But it's okay. That's why we have the sheet. So if my code matches this, then that gene from that parent, remember, this doesn't necessarily mean I have curved thumbs quite yet. Um, but that's the gene that's on that chromosome. Because remember, it takes two chromosomes to make a trait. And so we'll talk about later how you need two of these letters to actually represent and know what the phenotype, the physical appearance of a person is. So you can look through here and you can tell if letters are just like a single letter. So notice I've also tried to make the uppercase and lowercase are the same always. Also, I've tried to pick letters that you can tell easily. So I haven't used the letter, for instance, O, because you can't tell a capital O from a lowercase o. I haven't used P because that can be an uppercase and lowercase difficulty. So I've tried to pick letters that you can tell the uppercase and lowercase pretty straightforward. Sometimes the letters don't make sense, like G for widow's peak. The little, if your hairline comes down to a point, doesn't make. Why did I use a G? Yeah, just because I could tell big G from little g. Some of it does make sense. For instance, in Huntington's disease. In Huntington's disease, that neurological disease I talked about, Huntington's disease, yes. So having the gene for Huntington's disease is a capital H. Makes sense. Used H. Little h means no. I have a normal gene that does not give me that disease. And sometimes we'll talk about dominance and recessive in a moment again. But sometimes the disease can be a dominant trait. Just means that it's always turned on and it will be passed on. It will be expressed. Then we have this line of ones that are on the X chromosome. So these characteristics, these are X chromosome characteristics: color vision, hemophilia, clotting factors, and that X-linked renal disease. And where they're called X-linked because they are on the X chromosome, and we must, because of getting one X chromosome, if you're male, or two female, we must use these X's. So this letter right here, I would pronounce that X big B, and that's normal for color vision, or X little b, be recessive for colorblind. And notice I've used these terms dominant and recessive, and so very often this dominant trait is the capital. And in fact, it's almost always the capital letter, and the lowercase letter is the recessive trait. Eye color, notice there's three genes for that. So it just means that in the dominance, that the big E is going to dominate over the little e prime, and the little e prime will dominate over blue. So I put most dominant to least dominant here. In blood type, there are two dominant genes. The A and B are both dominant genes, and so we use this I big A and I big B to represent the antigen, the marker that's going to be on the outside of our red blood cells to determine the blood type. And the O doesn't have a gene. And if you actually look at that one, you notice that other way, LP, that probably isn't, it doesn't even start with methionine. That's a messed up gene. So I just don't make that marker. I don't make that protein that goes on the outside. Now, so any gene so all these genes up here that don't have X and Y, those are autosomal. Down here, these are also autosomal because they don't have an X or a Y. Down here, we have those two Y linked, so the male deafness, and we know they're Y linked because we're using the letter Y here. It doesn't make any sense to talk about dominant or recessive for Y linked traits because you're only going to have one copy. So, and notice I haven't used uppercase or lowercase letters. I've just used the uppercase in all cases. And so you can tell that, like, for instance, making good male gametes is a big G, and there's that protein. And then the mutated, which would cause problems with the male gamete. Sorry if you saw that coming. I just sneezed, but I did pause the video, so that'll look interesting on video. But you didn't get to hear and see the sneeze, but you might have saw the build up. Sorry about that. Sam didn't bother Sam right behind me, as you can tell, because he didn't hear a thing. Remember, he's deaf as he's got the Y. Maybe he has that Y chromosome that we just talked about with deafness. So he is male. So hey, could be maybe it runs in cats as well. Now, that dominant and recessive that I talked about, so the capital letters will do our dominant, the lowercase will be our little letters, those are the recessive. Now, what I mean by that is a dominant trait only has to be gotten from one parent. So we're going to end up with two letters for all of these alleles. So eventually, for instance, like widow's peak, we're going to have like big G, little g. We get one from maybe dad and one from mom. Well, what's this person going to look like? We call that the phenotype. The phenotype was what you physically look like. Phenotype is PHENO type. The phenotype is what it physically looks like. So if I have a big G, little g, the dominant will dominate. It gets turned on, so to speak, and I will have a widow's peak instead of straight. To be straight, I'd have to get two little g's. So to be straight, to be a recessive trait, I'd have to have little g, so there's no widow's peak to dominate over that. And that works for almost all of the characteristics. The dominant letter will dominate over the recessive letter. It will be expressed if you have that. We need two recessive traits in order to have that. So for Mr. Ackert's blue eyes, for instance, down here his little e's, he had to have little e from both parents. I had to get blue eyes from both of my parents. It's okay if you have a brown-eyed parent. For instance, my dad has brown eyes, but I can still have blue because he had a little e in his genes. He inherited blue from one of his parents. So don't worry about paternity and all that just quite yet. We'll get to that actually. We've done a little bit of that already with DNA testing with our earlier activities. So I think that gives you the information that you're going to need for this lesson. Do not feel that you need to memorize anything that is on here. You will be able to use this at all times. So I would keep it right handy to have. Please continue on, answer the questions that are following here, and please do your best to answer the questions. If you miss one, it's okay. This is a learning experience, and we'll move on. Once you're done with this, then you'll be able to actually go back and determine the alleles for your chromosomes that you've been determining. So you have a couple practices there where I'll give you the gene, and you need to come over here and then try to find out which characteristic um, that chromosome is coding for. All right, just know the answers will be on here. All right, thanks for watching. Please do good work on the following questions. Ask if you have questions. We are doing this at school, and even though this is kind of a remote lesson, we are in person, so that if you get stuck, please ask. I'll be in the room.